When I saw that today's lectionary gospel text was the parable of the talents, I must confess that I groaned a bit inwardly. Don't get me wrong, I don't dislike the text at all. I've heard it from childhood. It's one of the most familiar Bible stories I know. But there's the problem, I suppose. I've heard and preached a lot of sermons on this parable, and you may have heard more than your share as well, especially during stewardship season, so it's very hard to break new ground with the parable or to offer new insight. Many of you could likely tell me the parable from memory without even reading it. But if we're really familiar with what's happening in a text, sometimes we can see with fresh eyes if we look at what is happening around the text. That is, instead of reading it as a piece unto itself, look at where it lives within the larger sweep of Matthew's gospel. If we step back 2 steps and look more broadly at where the parable of the talents is situated, we see that it is one of 3 units of instruction that Jesus offers in the 25th chapter of Matthew. The parable of the wise and foolish bridesmaids, the parable of the talents, and the account of the great judgment, the separation of the sheep from the goats, as many of us know it. The instruction comes quickly, one bit right after another, with no real elaboration or explanation, just a sort of a continuous flow of information. It all goes together, in other words. When I was in seminary, I had a 2-hour-long church history class a couple of times a week, a lecture class. And each lecture was so jam-packed with information that I could barely keep up with writing notes. Every word was crucial, all the material was testable, you had to know one doctrine or event to understand the next, and I'd leave each class with my hand cramping and my head spinning from trying to get it all down. A single class session was like drinking from a fire hose. And the 25th chapter of Matthew feels a bit like that. Jesus is rattling off a lot of instruction. And then we come to the beginning of Matthew 26. When Jesus had finished saying all of these things, he said to his disciples, "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be handed over to be crucified." So now I'm interested in a different way. Now I see the entire 25th chapter of Matthew as Jesus' final public instruction, the last lecture, as it were. He knows time is running out, and he wants to make sure his followers know what to do going forward. It's a bit like a parent giving final instructions to the kids before leaving on a trip. There's some leftover casserole in the refrigerator, so you can warm that up for supper, or you can order a pizza if you like. Remember, the dog needs to go out first thing in the morning, midday, and again before bed. Feed him a half a cup of food in the morning and again in the evening, and fill his water bowl. Don't forget to put the recycling out by the curb on Wednesday evening. The truck comes first thing Thursday morning, and you don't want to miss it. You get the picture. These are the things I want you to do in my absence. Don't just watch TV and throw your laundry on the floor. So with that lens on things, let's go back and look at the 25th chapter of Matthew as a unit of final instructions, rather than just looking at the parable of the talents as a story unto itself. Jesus begins Matthew 25 by saying, "The kingdom of heaven will be like this." And he tells the story of 10 waiting bridesmaids. All of the bridesmaids are gathered for a wedding feast. All have oil lamps in anticipation of the bridegroom's arrival. But 5 of the bridesmaids are wise. They have come prepared for the unexpected, prepared for a delayed arrival. They have brought with them extra oil. The foolish bridesmaids are not prepared for the long haul. They brought oil with them, just not enough. The result is that by the time the bridegroom at last arrives, all of the lamps are burning low. The initial supply of oil is all but gone. The wise bridesmaids are prepared. They have extra oil to trim their lamps, so the bridegroom finds them with lamps burning brightly, while the foolish bridesmaids, caught unprepared, miss out on the feast. The message of this first instruction is, be prepared, be alert, don't let your guard down. Jesus' followers are to be at the ready for his return. And the lamps? Well, elsewhere in Matthew's gospel, Jesus says, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works. Now is the time for active discipleship, for preparation, for anticipation, for being about the work for as long as it takes. Don't permit your light, your discipleship, to go out. The kingdom will come on God's time and not our own. But wait with urgency, Jesus is saying. Because while the wait may be long, the kingdom may come without warning. And what does that active discipleship look like? Jesus next moves to the parable of the talents, again contrasting wise and foolish, or faithful and unfaithful. We heard the story earlier. 3 household servants are given charge over their master's property to see to it in his absence. The task that they are given is an active one. Use this to be about my work, to act on my behalf until I return. Take my resources and act as my agents. Use them as I would use them. Well, there are 3 servants in the story, but only 2 courses of action. 2 of the servants take initiative. They take risks. They double their master's money. Their stewardship is active and it is aggressive. Any investor knows that big returns, especially over a short term, involve bigger risks. No risk, no reward. But the 3rd servant, well, pointedly, he does not act in his master's interests. He acts in his own. Self-preservation. Fearful of losing that with which he has been entrusted, his instinct is to clutch it. He does nothing with it, or very little. Simply buries it, which is not what his master would have done with it. So he fails to act as his master's agent. And like the foolish bridesmaids, when the master returns, he's not prepared. Taken together then, these first 2 pieces of instruction are, wait with urgency and expectation. Don't get caught napping. Be aggressive and take risks. Don't just hold on to the little piece of the kingdom that's been entrusted to you. Expand it. Multiply it. We've domesticated the parable of the talents, I think. We've laundered out the risk. We've just made the message all of us have received in different measure in terms of finances and abilities, and we all need to do our bit, working with what resources and abilities we've been given. The message is more pointed. Take what has been entrusted to you and leverage it aggressively on the master's behalf. Slide all your chips to the center of the table. Don't play penny ante. So, urgency, agency, risk. But in pursuit of what? What does the kingdom look like? We know the measure of an earthly kingdom. It is measured in power. How far does your influence extend? The greater your power, the longer your reach. Or it's measured in wealth. How much can you accumulate? How many resources can you stockpile and bring to bear? What of the kingdom of heaven? What would God have us tirelessly, urgently, aggressively investing in. We come to the final piece of Jesus' instruction. And again, we see the repeated theme of wise, foolish, faithful, unfaithful, prepared or unprepared for the kingdom's coming. Sheep and goats. Jesus says to his followers, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at the left. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And the king will answer them, truly I tell you, just as you did it unto one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. The kingdom of heaven, or Jesus' eternal reign, is not measured in wealth or power, but in love. Specifically, it is measured by the love that is revealed in the care of the least, and the hungry, and the thirsty, and the stranger, and the sick, and the prisoner. So that is what we are called to invest everything in pursuit of. And the question for any church, or for us as individual believers, is this: are we following the instructions that have been left with us? Are we, in fact, urgent in our expectation of God's future, lamps trimmed and burning? Are we risk takers for the kingdom? Are we investing ourselves unstintingly in what God prizes most? Care of God's creation and of God's children, especially the least. It's not a question that's answered only once. Rather, it is a question that we answer again and again and again, from now to kingdom come. While I'm away, do these things. And remember, I love you. Amen.